Hi, this is Eddie Hearn, and you're watching Lights Out.
This is Faisal Khan for Lights Out in association with Shamrock Boxing, and this is podcast 17 of the Lights Out Boxing podcast. Glad to be joined by fellow Lights Out team member Luke Anthony Walsh. Luke, how you doing, mate?
Amazingly well. I mean, we have boxing back on the cards, and we finally can actually talk about boxing that has happened in the last 7 days. It's been a long time coming, but it's
yeah, 100% there. Don't think we quite caught you there at the end. Might have been some bad reception. Mark, how you doing, my man?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, very well.
Mark Burns' first podcast today with us. Mark also works down at the famous, iconic Shamrock Boxing Gym. Mark, obviously, before we get started on the podcast, I think it's only fair that you just tell us a bit about yourself, some of the fighters that you're working with, and your relationship with Shamrock.
Yeah, well, let's start with my relationship with Shamrock, because that's goes back to when I was the age of 8. Mervyn, who owns Shamrock now, his dad, Jimmy Turner, was my amateur coach at the old Luton Irish. So that goes back, I'm 48 now, so that goes back 40 years almost. So there's my association with Shamrock.
Very, very long time ago.
Yeah, very long time. And Mervyn I've known for a while, and I've just got the utmost respect for Mervyn. It's, I can't say more than that much, most respect. Fighters that I work with, my own fighters is Justin Menzies, Dalton Miller, Asad, as you've met before. Then obviously I work with Ishii, and another pro that will be coming on board, which is Reece Porter, which will be one of mine at Shamrock. And then I work with Rod Julian at RJ's. I've worked with him for a long time. Fantastic young coach, excellent technical coach. I worked with him with a couple of fighters, one in particular, which is Sam Gilly, who's just won the Southern Area title. And he's going to go places, he will, trust me. With him and Rod, they'll go places.
Yeah, I've been down Shamrock quite a few times. I remember we interviewed you, I believe it was all the way back in December. We spoke to the likes of Asad and Ishii and Dalton, some really good fighters, some good prospects coming up in boxing, especially Ishii. I mean, I still watched a clip of that knockout on his debut. It was absolutely phenomenal. You've got some good fighters down there. And of course, to get to know more about the fighters, make sure you follow Mark on social media. We'll be sharing his links in the description. Let's just make a quick start. I just want to remind the viewers out there, if they haven't, to make sure they hit that subscribe button. Follow us on all the social media platforms, which include Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Like we do with every podcast, we sort of get the guys fired up with a quick fire question. Today's quick fire question is going to be, if we was a promoter in boxing, which current boxer would we want to promote? So guys, the floor's all yours. Take it away.
There's two in mine.
No, you can only have one. You can only have one. Can't be greedy, Luke.
Do you know what? I want to say Dalton Smith. His knockout at the weekend against Nathan Bennett was sensational. He's definitely, with a performance like that, it makes you feel that he has the potential to be able to go on and do big things. And when you see shots like that and a punch like that, it shows that he can only go on to do bigger things. But it's close between him and Dynamite Daniel Dubois. I mean, we'll talk about the potential dream matchup we're going to get down the line, but he is a world champion in waiting. He will have a world champion round his belt within the decade. I guarantee it.
Fingers crossed. It'd be nice to see another fellow Brit get a British title around, a world title around the strap. So down to you now, Mark. Who would you want to promote if you're a current boxing promoter?
I've got two as well, but
come on, same rule applies to you as well, Mark.
I'm going to go with O'Hara Davis.
Really?
I just like him. I like him. I do. I just like the guy. I don't know what it is. My other one, by the way, was Chris Eubank Jr. because I think they're similar characters, but. Yeah, O'Hara Davis. I like him. I just like him.
Well, fair enough. Listen, O'Hara Davis, he's entertaining.
He's full. He's no fool.
I like it. I like O'Hara Davis too. I've met him a few times, done a couple of interviews with him. I've not got a bad word to say about him. So obviously, Luke's gone for Dalton Smith. Very impressed with him on Saturday night. Mark's gone for O'Hara Davis. I'm gonna go for Ryan Garcia. Not the finished article. I think we're gonna see the best Ryan Garcia within the next 2 to 3 years. I think he's a phenomenal athlete. I think he's got a good personality. I think he's a great boxer. I'm looking forward to that fight with Luke Campbell. I just think, right now, business sense, I don't know why the likes of Eddie Hearn and these guys are not willing to sort of snap him up. And we know he's not with Oscar De La Hoya anymore. I'm a big fan. And I do think we're going to see the best of Ryan Garcia within the next 2 years. And like I said, that fight with Luke Campbell is one I'm really, really looking forward to because it's his first major test. And I expect him not to have the easiest of nights, but I expect him to win that fight. But again, Luke Campbell, another great fighter. It's going to be a tough test for him. But that's later down the line. We have to talk about what's been on everyone's mind today is the interview we saw yesterday that Frank Warren did with BT Sport, and he has called out Matchroom Promotions. Now, Frank Warren has said that he wants the best to fight the best. He wants to put on these dream fights that Luke mentioned, and he wants his fighters to go up against the Frank Warren fighters. There's some great fights he's mentioned. There's fights that we want to see that we've spoken about before. I mean, it's not as easy as it makes out. I mean, if it was up to us, we'd watch these fights tomorrow, but with what's going on with the whole pandemic situation, some of these fighters that are already on different routes, there's some really, really big fights that we could be potentially looking at. Mark, I just want to start off with you. What did you make of Frank Warren proposing this idea to Eddie Hearn and the boxing world?
I think it's a good business move. Fair play to him. It's all about business. Professional boxing at that level is a business. And he sees the opportunity that two of them working together is better than them working apart. It's as simple as that. In this day and age, you have to work with your competitor. Keep your enemies close, as my dad used to say. So I think it's a great business move.
I mean, looking at it, I mean, there are some tremendous fights. I mean, I think the fights that have been mentioned, they're definitely probably the best fighters in terms of domestic-wise in the division. It's a long way off from happening. Obviously, as I mentioned, the pandemic is, still upon us. Frank Warren's currently focusing on his shows. Eddie Hearn's just began Fight Camp, which we saw the first chapter of it last Saturday night. Luke, we've always discussed big fights that we'd like to see. We've always spoken about the politics of boxing. But when you look at this sort of proposal, what do you think this says about Frank Warren? Calling out not only Eddie Hearn, but also calling out the best of his crop of fighters and saying, you know what, let's do it. Let's see who really does have the best fighters.
Exactly. And, it's just mad when you think they've never held a conversation until today. Mm-hmm. That's just surreal. But, two Goliaths of the boxing promotion world who, have had world champions, as long as your arm in each division on both sides, and they're finally now coming together. It's monumental. I mean, looking at the Frank Warren statement that he put on his website, he said, "This is our chance to do that. You can call it my 2020 vision. People talk about various industries resetting following the traumas this year and reflect on this world. The fans are longing to see the likes of Anthony Yarde take on Joyce, take on Daniel Dubois, and then obviously with both sides having the keys to the dream match itself with Anthony Joshua on Matchroom, and of course Tyson Fury on the other. They have to come together. Now is the time to do it. And in closing, with what Frank said is that you could say I'm throwing down the gauntlet, and I hope this honest proposal is taken at face value and not bleakly dismissed. For the long term of the good of our sport, now is the time to put up or shut up. I mean, I think it will happen. I think this is it. This is the moment where they come together. It's mental.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Mark, you work in the industry. We all talk about the fights we want to see, but it's never as easy as that. I mean, we can turn around and say we want to see this fighter fight that fighter, but obviously money, in terms of rankings, where the current fighters are in their careers at the moment comes into play. I just want to talk about some of the fights that have been named as potential fights for, this terrific dream card that Frank Warren wants to put together. You got Joyce versus Derek Chisora, Daniel Dubois against Dillian Whyte. I want to focus on them two fights because, you have a look at it right now. Chisora takes on Usyk whenever it's going to happen. Dubois and Joyce are scheduled to fight in October, and Dillian Whyte takes on Alexander Povetkin in a few weeks and is scheduled to have a world title fight February 2021. Now, you look at them two fights, would you say realistically, Mark, that they are fights that can be made, or do you think all four fights are just on a different path right now?
Yeah, I mean, let's get one thing straight first and foremost. It's not the boxers. When you're a boxer, you'll fight anyone. This is down to promoters and TV rights. That's why the fights don't happen. That's the first thing. I think in the first two that you've mentioned, is it Dubois and Chisora, was it?
Joyce versus Derek Chisora is one fight that Frank would like to make, and Dubois versus Dillian Whyte.
Could happen. That could happen because Chisora, I think he's great. He's just a fantastic entertainment, but he's on the back end of his career. So it's a good move and a stepping stone if Joyce can beat him. Dillian Whyte, he's on a different path to anyone else in the British rankings, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean,
he's well level. It's a step back for him.
You have to look at where these current fighters are right now, and you have to think realistically, are some of these fights even capable of being made? I mean, the Joyce Derek Chisora was a fight they were looking to make a few years ago when Joe was with David Hay. The Daniel Dubois Dillian Whyte fight, I remember doing an interview with Dean Whyte, Dillian's brother, and he said listen, I mean, yes, maybe somewhere down the line in the future, but right now Daniel is still sort of in the early stages of his career. Dillian is just basically, should have already had a world title shot. So I look at that fight and I don't think it's realistic enough. Another fight that I really, really like is that British clash in the light heavyweight division, Anthony Yarde versus Josh Buatsi. I think that's a fight that should have been made perhaps maybe a year ago, but looking where they both are right now, I think Yarde's just come off a tremendous effort fighting for the world title against Kovalev. Buatsi has, ruled the British outright. That's a fight that makes sense. Another good fight is Williams versus Andrade for the middleweight title. We all know Liam Williams is the mandatory for that title as well. Mentioned the other fights, Charlie Edwards versus Kal Yafai, a good fight as well. They've had a bit of a rivalry in the past. Hamzah Sheeraz, Ted Cheeseman. I've always said Hamzah Sheeraz is probably one of the next big things in boxing, and Ted Cheeseman the other night put in a tremendous performance against Sam Eggington. A great fight at super featherweight, Archie Sharp versus Zelfa Barrett, and another good fight domestically in terms of the heavyweight division, Nathan Gorman versus Dave Allen. Another good fight. This is what we want to see. You want to see these 50-50 fights, especially with what's been going on. And Luke, I mean, out of all those fights I've just mentioned, which fight stands out for you?
I do think Shiraz Cheeseman is one to pick out there. Again, Cheeseman, honestly, that was a match of the night. By far and away, he was amazing, and he fought long and hard to get there, and it was a well-deserved victory. I think Dubois White is interesting. Joyce is on this path where he is up and coming. He's having, he's making the right moves at the moment, and he's going in the right direction. Derek Chisora at the moment is still proving why he's still good in 2020 than he was 8-9 years ago when he fought Klitschko in Germany. Very different. We've been on two different things, but now they come together. It's so close to call. Because on one day you could quite easily say Chisora with the experience, but then on the other day you could say Joyce with the youthfulness and the energy that he could bring. It's so tight between them two. You could put that on in Las Vegas for a world title quite easily in about 2 or 3 years' time. I think these two could build it up.
It's 8 big fights there. Obviously, it all won't happen on one card. But Mark, do you think that these fights need to happen over a duration of time, or is it just a case of because of what's going on in the world? Because there's obviously no fans allowed into boxing or any particular sport. Would you like to see this all happen in one night?
Yeah, I think. We want 1 or 2 nights, because fans are going to have to pay for this. So you've got to put on the best against the best to make it entertaining. So yeah, it probably could happen over 2 to maybe 3 shows. You've got a lot of fighters there, and a lot of them are probably 10, 12 round fights. So it probably makes 2 or 3 shows.
Eddie Hearn obviously confirmed today that a phone call had taken place between him and Frank Warren, and both have actually agreed to sit down and meet up and have a bit of grub after fight camp is out of the way to discuss the possibilities of these fights happening. British boxing has been on a massive rise, I would say, I believe it's been on the rise since Tyson Fury won the world title in Dusseldorf in 2015. But my question, obviously, to you guys is why has it taken so long for an idea like this to actually be taken serious, and why has it taken so long for someone to come out with this idea and say, do you know what, let's just make it happen? Because me personally, I actually thought about this a year ago. Why has it taken so long? Yes, I can understand they're both rival promoters. They both claim they're the best promoters in boxing right now. But why? Why have the fans had to wait for something like this to come along?
I don't know. It's just surreal, isn't it? That, the fact that today, it's just, it doesn't sound right at all. Because for what they've done for British boxing over the last 30 years, they've brought it places that we never thought we'd see. I mean, I was watching old Frank Bruno fights from Wembley, and the shows that they put on there, and against Tyson Fury with Frank Warren standing by Tyson Fury through the comeback as well. It's just that the shows that they've put on has not only helped propel British boxing forward and be a world-leading standard of training and of performance, and being able to dominate divisions, but also it's the shows themselves, and it's the moments that they create that we carry on talking about for the next 25, 50 years.
Mark, where do you stand on why this has taken so long for an idea like this to come into place?
I think it's always happened. I don't think we seem to forget boxing, I don't know, let's say 20 years ago. Look at Nigel Benn, Chris Eubank. Mm-hmm. They were two different promoters. When you had ITV boxing, the problem is today is it's the TV rights. And that's why it's taken so long to bring them together, or to even get the idea is a pandemic has caused that, because they're probably panicking about the TV rights and money. Mm-hmm. But we've done it before in British boxing with Kelly Malone, Frank Maloney, whatever you want to call him these days. I say that with much respect. He had Eubank, and Nigel Benn was with Frank Warren, but they still got on two fights. I
remember many, many years ago in 2003, a certain HBO and Showtime put on Mike Tyson versus Lennox Lewis. Both were with rival promoters, rival TV rights. They still made it happen for the sake of the fans. And I think obviously because of how boxing is a lot different to what it was in 2003, with how big social media is, the money that's being pumped into it. The TV rights works a lot different to how it did back in 2003. But I think for the sake of what the fans have had to suffer, for what these fighters have had to suffer. I mean, before we started this podcast, Mark, you mentioned about small hall shows perhaps not even happening at all this year. I think these guys, forget the fighters, Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn now need to just bang their heads together and say, do you know what? Rivalry aside, let's forget about talking about number 1 and 2. Let's give the fans something to get excited about, because the bottom line is there's potential fights that are going to happen this year, but there's no excitement to it because there's no fans. I think if you have a show where there's rivalry, where there's that bit of competition there, and both at the end of it, one promoter is going to stand up and say, well, I've got the best stable, and the other one's going to have to, eat humble pie, because they're both going to come out and back up their stables, which is what you expect them to do. A promoter will pump his money and his time into his fighters. But I think this makes perfect sense. With or without the fans, that's obviously a story for another day. But I personally do think that this is the best idea. This salvages the year we've had in terms of boxing. If you're watching the current shows without the fans, some people like them, some people slate them. I've been enjoying them. But I just think that this gives everyone the reason to get excited. Like we were excited back in February when we saw Fury versus Wilder. Like we were excited last year when we saw the two Ruiz-Joshua fights. This brings back that level of excitement, whether it happens over one night or 2 nights. But I personally would love to see it. Luke, when and where do you think this happens? So I want to just sort of rephrase the question. Do majority of these fights need to happen on the Fury Joshua card?
It's so difficult because, on one hand, is that you want to be able to deliver the best card you possibly can for that night, and showcase the best of the best, but you also don't want to take away from the spectacle itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's so hard. Yes and no. I think again, with the right balance, I think they'll achieve it. Going back to what I said about the right, I think even if they play into it like 5 or 10% and just say, well, I'm better like this, and have that sort of friendly rivalry, and they have this almost like that wrestling-esque sort of one roster is better than another, then everyone gets behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Where? Wembley Stadium. It has to be Wembley. Like, regardless of it, it's 80,000 fans or 8 fans. I think that is the only venue where, they can still. We've seen with Fight Camp, you can still put the pyrotechnics on and still create the atmosphere and the environment for it to be settled there and then in one ring, in one time. And when, I mean, I think we'll see it in spring next year. I think it will be highly unlikely that we see something this year, because I know obviously with Fight Camp, and I know we're going to see Joyce against Dubois at some point towards the latter end of this year. But I think at the start of next year we could really see it, and it could really start to formulate and come together.
Mark, I mean, what makes a real good spectacle is obviously the sort of warm up to it. Now, every time a Joshua Fury fight happens, one of the first questions we ask is who's on the undercard. What we get a lot these days is people tuning in before the ring walk, or perhaps waking up before the actual main event itself. Do you think that the Fury Joshua undercard benefits from having majority of these fights on that undercard?
Yeah, for true boxing fans it does. Yeah. But on the reverse of that, I don't think any of them fights we've discussed tonight, or they've been listed on this potential joint venture with Matchroom and Queensberry, need Anthony Joshua or Tyson Fury. Mm-hmm. I don't think that fight will happen this year anyway, but they're good fighters and top of the bill fighters and pay-per-view fighters in their own right, most of them. I mean, Chisora in his own right is a pay-per-view fighter. People pay to see Chisora.
100%.
Proper boxing fans will. So, do they need them? No. It's always good to have that fight, but when you've got 3 or 4 good fights on a show and you've got very good up-and-coming fighters on the show, true boxing fans want to see them up-and-coming fighters, and I think things like if they can do joint ventures, I think these 2 big promoters also should not forget the little promoters, because they've got some fantastic fighters that make these shows.
100% agree with you. I mean, I think everyone can benefit from this idea that Frank Warren's brought along.
Yeah, definitely.
I do think some of the small hall shows, you could potentially throw a few of their fighters in. Like I said, it's a win-win situation for everyone. It's an amazing idea. Whether it happens or not, my personal opinion is I don't think it will happen, because like you said, promoters, and there's a lot of egos involved in this, and I'm not going to slate people, but there's a lot of egos in this. There'll be a little obstacle that stops all this from happening, which is a shame, because you look at the fights, there's some phenomenal fights there. You'd sell out arenas, you'd definitely get loads of pay-per-view buys, but I personally think I don't see it happening, because again, egos, rivalries, money, that will take over what potentially could be a brilliant time for British boxing. I just want to quickly move away from this topic and just discuss Fight Camp Week 1. The main event itself obviously stole the night, but guys, your thoughts on the show overall?
Yeah, it was a really good night. I mean, it makes you wonder if you ever won the lottery. I'd want boxing in my back garden, and put on a show. Just hey, they can do it at Luton Town. Have them come through the away end. Yeah, I think it was a really good night of British boxing. I mean, obviously Frank Warren has said in a statement that he's questioned put in place procedures, and we still the right adequate equipment put in. I mean, the only thing we have to say is about these next 2 or 3 weeks is that whilst the quality of boxing has to, to deliver, is that they're doing it safely. Is that we all fear that all it will take is one nasty knockout, and it could and obviously the coronavirus as well. We want the boxers and trainers to stay safe as well. Is that things could still change, but all being well, it's going to be it's going to be great, and especially with Katie Taylor in a couple of weeks' time. I think it's going to be. I'm looking forward to it.
Mark, what was your thoughts on the show?
Yeah, I thought I didn't actually watch all of it. I've actually enjoyed the rest from boxing. My golf handicap's getting quite good at the moment. But,
my backhanded tennis is also improving.
Yeah. It's fantastic at the moment. But I thought it was all good. It is what it is. Fair play to whatever anyone thinks of Eddie Hearn. Fair play to him for doing it. He's trying something different. He's thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
Whether it's good or bad for boxing, no one's going to tell. The good thing is the fighters can train, they can get out, showcase their skills and get paid, hopefully. So,
Mark, I just want to quickly ask you something. I mean, I remember when we obviously did that interview with you, and one of the main topics was obviously about Liam Smith and Kell Brook. Now, the main event featured 2 super welterweight fighters in Ted Cheeseman and Sam Eggington, a cracking fight. And again, I don't want to take the limelight away from the likes of Dalton Smith and Fabio Wardley and the other guys that won on the night who put in very good performances. But that fight was an absolute barn fest. It was a brilliant fight. I've watched it twice. I do agree with the decision. I thought Ted Cheeseman did just enough. You obviously gave me your thoughts on that super welterweight division. How far do you think Ted Cheeseman can go? I mean, what do you think he can potentially achieve within in the rest of his career?
It's a hard one, but I like Ted Cheeseman. I personally thought he won it as well. So I don't really know. You can't go through your boxing career using your face as a punch bag. Mm-hmm. It takes its toll on you, and that's my concern. I think he's got all the skills to be British European champion, without a doubt. He's got everything there, but you can't have too many hard fights. And that's what's happened. The thing is, the reason I say that is you just got to look at his last opponent. He's done exactly the same thing as what Ted Cheeseman was doing. Used his head as a punch bag. Very good fighter, tough as nails, can't take nothing away from him. But he's feeling that effect now of hard fights. Sam Eggington is a brilliant boxer and he's achieved a lot in his career. Probably could achieve more if he didn't fight so hard. But, that's a fighter's instinct. So it's a hard one to say. I think he can achieve definitely over the British level, maybe a European.
It'd be interesting to see because, like I said, he's a very entertaining fighter, and so is Sam Eggington. And I'd love to see him do it again. I mean, it'd be brilliant to see him do it again. It was a very good fight. It was entertaining, and again, credit to Eddie Hearn, as you mentioned, doing something different. Taking the limelight away from this no fans business. Yes, boxing, football, whatever sport you follow is not the same without the fans. But again, it's just something we just got to be a bit patient about. But I enjoyed the show. I thought Dalton Smith was brilliant. I thought Fabio Wardley put in a good fight. Reece Bellotti versus...
I was literally just going to come on to Fabio Wardley. Of course, Dillian Whyte's protege in the making. I mean, we've talked about Joyce and Dubois and Chisora and Whyte. Is that we can maybe add Fabio Wardley into that mix in the next 2 or 3 years. Is that it was such a strong performance with a 3rd round knockout. Is that even at English level, you think
there's stronger tests out there though. No disrespect to Simon Vallily, but he's stepping up from cruiserweight. I mean, well done to Fabio Wardley, brilliant performance. But I do believe there's bigger and stronger tests out there for him, and I think the next another 2 years at this level, maybe perhaps next year towards the end of the year, the British outright. I do think there are stronger tests out there for him, and I think he needs to be tested. I'm not taking nothing away from him. I thought he put in a good performance, but again, there's definitely bigger tests out there. I personally think another 2-3 fights. Look at the likes of Nathan Gorman, Dave Allen, even maybe David Price. But I do think he's still in the early stages of his career. but a very entertaining fighter. Working with someone like Dillian Whyte is only going to do wonders for his career. Very interested to see what he does next. Guys, before we end, let's get a quick prediction. If this does happen, who wins? Queensbery Promotions or Matchroom Promotions?
The fans.
I'll go with Queensbery.
I'm going to go with Queensbery as well.
The fans are the winner. Boxing is the
win.
winner.
But that's all we've got time for today on podcast 17 of the Lights Out Boxing Podcast. Mark, a massive pleasure for you joining us today.
You're welcome.
I'm going to pop down Shamrock soon, so hopefully I'll be getting that camera in your face and be putting a lot of pressure on you like I like to do. Really appreciate you coming on today, mate. And Luke as well, always talkative, always giving us his thoughts, never shy. Loves to just say it as it is. Thank you as well for joining us today. To the viewers out there, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Links are in the description. Don't forget to check out Mark's social media platforms. We'll be sharing them as well. Guys, thank you for your time. And to the listeners and the viewers out there, thank you for listening to podcast 17 of the Lights Out Boxing Podcast.